Who are you and what do you do?
So I'm Joshua Weissman. I've always struggled to define myself outside of being a chef. So we'll just go with that. I make a lot of food for a lot of people, and a lot of people like my food.
Right. And you're like a super dope content creator. You're like your own production hub. You're a little more than just a fire chef.
Yeah, we try to do it. We try to make things a little more different,
Right.
rather than just cooking food all the time. It's like, how do I get people excited about food in the same way that I am?
Right.
And that, I think, is what we're constantly fighting for and figuring out ways to maneuver through that goal. So things have been created to achieve that.
Right. So you wrote your first cookbook at what, 18?
17.
17.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
tell us a little bit about like what that was like.
That was wild. I feel like that was a it was like, you're 17 years old, an opportunity presents itself, you're like, oh, fuck it, yeah. I had
Right.
no idea what I was doing.
Right.
No clue what the fuck I was doing. They're like, hey, do you want to write this book? And I was like, yeah, I failed English class yesterday. And so that's kind of how that went. When it ended up on my table, at 17, I'm like, well, I'll write this and maybe it'll be a good experience. And came out the other end and made a little bit of money, but I mean, it was just like something fun to do for me at the time. And it taught me a lot about how to work with people, I would say. Yeah.
What was your biggest challenge? Like being 17 and putting together a cookbook seems like a tall task. So what was your biggest challenge with that project?
Honestly, it didn't feel like that much of a challenge other than like having to deal with like, I will say that there was a huge ego boost at that time. My teacher was like, do your math homework. And I was like, I'm writing a book.
You know who I am?
Shut the fuck up. It wasn't even like a you know who I am. It was more so of just like, I suddenly realized that there are so many more important things out there other than doing the math homework that you're never going to use for the rest of your life. And it made it hard for me to finish school. Right. I almost didn't finish high school because of that. Because I was like, what's the point of all this stuff? Like, I don't need any of this stuff. If I can do this kind of stuff now at this age, then why not just keep ripping and forget all this stuff? And yeah, so that was a big challenge. It really made me very derogatory towards, education, unfortunately. I think education is good, for the record. But at the time, I'm 17, so.
Right.
Yeah, I had to work through that.
And so even with like a lot of people grow up with cooks in their family, in their homes, but not everybody finds like a passion for it, or even many people that find a passion for it don't figure out how to pursue it. So I guess aside from you growing up with a family that was very into cooking and the process, the experience of cooking, what were some of the things that were pushing you towards finding your own path through food?
I think that I have a very limited number of things that I really, really like. There's not that many. I could probably count them on one hand, and I go all in on those things. And I'm very much of I could consume it over and over and over, or repeat it over and over. Right? Food is like at the top of that list, and it always has been since I was very, very young. And it's also something that, thank God, I'm good at. Right? If I wasn't good, then that might have changed my perspective on it. I don't know. Right. But I was naturally good at it when I started, and so I think it was just like that perfect marriage. And I knew when I was young, when I was like maybe 7, I was like, this is my thing. Like, and I don't know why, but innately I knew I needed to take time and just focus on that. Otherwise, I didn't want to get distracted, basically. It's like, if I focus on this, I know I can be really great at this. And that's kind of how I stuck to it.
From my understanding, you moved to like Austin for like one of your first real restaurant experiences. So what was the decision behind going to Austin as opposed to LA or New York or anywhere else in the world?
At the time, I didn't have money. There you go, right? Like, I think LA and Austin to me were like already captivated as food cities, and everybody knows LA food is amazing. Everybody knows New York food is amazing, and they all have their own specialties.
Right.
But Austin was kind of on the top line of its up and coming, growing into its own as a food scene, and it was just before it started becoming ultra exciting. That's when I was like, I can catch this early, and I don't have the money to go anywhere else. I can just drive there and pack my stuff in my car and go there and find a little like apartment. And I ended up sharing like a tiny little apartment. And greatest decision ever, though, because the relationships there, the food scene there is totally different.
Right. And like with that being, so you grew up in the kitchen, but you've come into a more formal cooking environment. I guess, like, what are some of the things you learned from that first restaurant job that you still kind of apply to what you do today?
That's a good question. Well, I will say that having skill as a cook, cooking skills, knife skills, all that stuff, is important, but it won't save you when it comes to operating in a restaurant. Okay. It will not save you. You can be the fastest knife chopper in the world. You could have the greatest sauteing skills in the world. You can make the most perfect steak in the world, but that will not save you from being able to operate well in a restaurant. If you don't have grit, and you don't have the stamina, and you don't have the ability to say, no, this needs to be organized, this needs to be right, I need to do it this way every single time, you will fail in a restaurant.
Okay. How long did it take for you to learn that?
I learned it quickly. It probably about 6 months.
Okay.
It took about six to 8 months for me to really get it. The first 6 months were brutal because I knew how to make everything. Like, nobody had to show me a recipe. Like, hey, Josh, can you make a beurre monte for this lobster dish? Go on. Yeah, sure, no problem. Make a beurre monte. I already knew how to do it. I don't need a fucking recipe. I've been doing this my whole life.
Right.
But it was very much like, hey, Josh, can you grab a third pan? I'm like, is it this pan?
Right,
and they're like, Jesus, you don't know what that is? And I'm like, this one? Like, which one you want? Just tell me, I'll go get it.
Right.
And I was very much of like, I'll do the work. Tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. But there was so much I didn't understand. So after 6 months of like just pure hell, I finally like recognized, okay, make sure you're doing your mise en place this way. Make sure you put the 9 pans here. Make sure that you organize your station, not just how everybody else does, but how you operate.
Right.
And so that was a learning curve.
Okay. And so by about like the age of 22, you had like been in several different restaurants. You had been cooking for like almost a decade, maybe even a decade at that point. So that means you were really well experienced by the age of 22. So looking back to you at 22, I guess what's one critique you would have for the 22-year-old you?
Ooh. I will say I think that I'm proud of the way that I navigated it because I feel like I said no to a lot of things people would have said yes to. Right. But I would say spending more time being patient and asking more questions.
Okay.
And being sort of more of a sponge at the tail end of my time in restaurants. Not to say that I'm leaving restaurants, but like, I got to a point where I was like leading the kitchen and I was like, basically training everybody. Right. Mm-hmm. And there's two Joshes. There's restaurant Josh and there's me, Josh now. And I was very much of like, I want this restaurant to run as smooth as possible and make this amazing. What the fuck are you doing? Sink looks like shit. Clean it up. Move on. And it was very sort of, I didn't really soak it in as much. And I miss some of those moments.
Right.
And so I think that's what I would advise myself is like pay attention more, enjoy the moments more, and exist a little bit more in the moment each day. And I think I would have retained some more information about food that was a little bit less, sorry, this is a long-winded answer.
No,
a little
good
less
answer,
superficial.
Right.
You get to a point in a kitchen where like you have a say, you have an opinion that matters. People want to hear it, and people respect you. And there have been times where when I first started, I was always like, anything someone tells me, I will take into consideration, add to my Rolodex, and I will get better with that. And there were some times where like maybe some chefs were like, oh, you should do it this way instead of this way. I'm like, shut the fuck up. Okay, I do it the way that I want to do it.
Right.
And I think a lot of line cooks have that attitude, and I hope that more of them are like, you know what? Let's look into it and really see and synthesize that hypothesis first before I say, no, that's bullshit. Because the only way that we get better as a community and as an industry, just as any other industry, is to consider all those questions and to try them and to not leave stones unturned. Right.
Was it difficult for you, like learning to get in like the process of managing others? Was that an easy transition?
No.
Okay.
Very hard. Very, very hard. I work with some chefs that, I've seen the traditional stuff, the Gordon Ramsay stuff. I've had chefs throw pots and pans at my head.
That's what
I've had people scream in my face.
Right.
There was one time that there was a restaurant I was working in. Chef was so mad at me because I didn't want to drop, he wanted me to drop something in the fryer for him. And I was like, fryer's full, stovetop's full. I've got it set in a pan here. As soon as this empties, I'm going to drop it. And he was like in some sort of a mood. And he just goes, when I say drop it, you fucking drop it. And I was like,
Like,
I'll
what?
drop it in a second, okay? And he got in my face and he started yelling at me. And he was so close to my face that my nose was bent on his nose, and I could feel his breath, and he was screaming at me. And then my parents walked in the door. Hey, Josh, let's have some lunch. And I was like, fuck. So anyway, a little bit of background. So I came from kitchens like that where I was like sort of conditioned to be like, no bullshit.
Yeah.
We're getting it done today. If anyone gets in my fucking way, you're done. Get the fuck out of the restaurant. Come back tomorrow. And so that's kind of how it was. And it was a hard transition because there were people that would come in that just like didn't have that same attitude, that same care, that same heart for the ingredients and like making sure that we're prepping everything to the highest level possible.
Right.
There's no margin of error. There's no error, right? But then there were all these people making mistakes. It was really hard for me to be like patient with them and be like, hey, look, put the knife down. Let me show you how to make this right. Let me show you how to cut. I was very much of like, go sit down.
Right.
In the fucking dining room. I'm having someone else do this. You fucking suck. You know, and that was I'm glad I grew out of that because that was like maybe my first year training was like that. And then after that, I started to calm down and I realized, you know what? People do a lot better when you just help coax them in the right direction and let them make the decisions, support them and be there as assistants, but don't do anything else. That was a hard learning curve.
Right. Like, is that the climate of like fine restaurants? Because that's what I envisioned. That like hard edge, no bullshit. Is that kind of
No, that is what it is. I would say it's getting better because it's no longer tolerated, and it shouldn't be.
Right.
Should not be. It's a big problem, and it's created a lot of mental health problems in the restaurant industry, and that's the reason why the abuse exists the way that it exists.
Right.
I've carried my friends out of the bathroom with needles in their arms. Like it's crazy, right? Like that's not good. We need to end that, and the best way to end it is to be more compassionate.
Right.
And the industry has a hard time doing it, but yeah. It's like that, but it is getting better.
So let's talk about your transition into like you leaving the restaurant world and coming into your own space. So I guess like what was the deciding factor in that?
It honestly just kind of happened. I started doing YouTube on the side because, to be honest, like from a financial perspective, I was like, I can't keep getting paid, $8 an hour to work 60 hours, 80 hours a week. I need to go I want to do other stuff. And so the fastest way out of that was to maybe sustain myself on YouTube. So I started producing a lot of stuff on that. And then once it was sustainable, I was like, okay, I'm not leaving the restaurant industry. I have bigger plans. So let me just take a sidestep out of here and I'm going to focus on this, build this out, and then I will buy myself time down the road.
Right.
And now we're at that point. Now I'm at that point where I can buy myself time to then go back to the industry and work on some projects that are really big that are coming soon.
What was the first YouTube video you made where you're like, this is something, like it's not even just a side hustle, but it's like your breakthrough video?
I can tell you which one I knew was special was the Popeyes chicken sandwich.
Yeah.
Remember when that came out? Everyone's freaking out.
Yeah.
And I was like, why is everyone freaking out over this? So I go and I order the sandwich, waited in line for like 30 minutes. While I'm in line, I'm reading stories about people getting like shot in line. And I'm like, over this?
It was getting hectic.
Yeah, it was getting crazy. and so I I get the sandwich and I open it up and I'm looking at it. I'm like, okay, that looks all right. I take a bite and I'm like, this is fucking bullshit. This is bullshit. All this hype over this, I could do way better than this. There's that ego. So I took it back home and I was like, you know what? Let me just make a video about this. I'm annoyed. I'm gonna make a video about it. And so I did that, and that video, like within minutes of it going up, there were like people posting it everywhere, and like a couple news channels were like talking about it, and I was like, huh. So conceptually, obviously this is because of all the hype around the sandwich, but maybe we can make a whole series out of this. And then But Better, our first series, was born basically.
Right. If you had to choose between a series, But Better or But Cheaper, you have to choose. Which one would you go with and why?
Probably But Better, because but Better to me involves there's less structure to it. But Cheaper is harder because we have to like eliminate certain things. You can't do certain things in But Cheaper because obviously it's going to make it too expensive, and that I don't like that. I do that specifically to help people understand like here's how you can save money. So I do that series 100% for the audience, 100%, not for me at all. If I had to choose to get rid of that series, I might do it. But people really like it, and it helps people, and that is what keeps me going on that series.
Right. I mean, I've learned a bunch of shit off of watching that, so please don't stop.
We won't. I promise you we won't. Yeah, it's too valuable, and I love seeing like comments of people being like, "Oh, I started cooking more now," and basically what I'm doing is I'm suffocating the excuse of somebody saying that they don't want to spend money on cooking. It's like, okay, you don't have to spend that much if you don't want to. You don't have to. So.
And that's one of the things that was super appealing about your videos for me, because I think I came across, honestly, now that you say it, it might have been the Popeye's chicken joints, the first video I saw, but I didn't really realize what it was because it was a bunch of people that were remaking the chicken sandwich. So I just kept going, and then I was looking for how to make the perfect hot chocolate. And then I came back to your page, and then I'm like, it's the same guy. And then I just took a deep dive, and I'm like, oh shit. And then like since then, I've been like super like tuned in. So that's just a random ramble.
I love that. Thank you for telling me that. That's amazing. That's good data too. That's amazing. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
I will say I do like cinnamon in my hot chocolate.
There you go.
It's a tad bit.
If you like cinnamon in your hot chocolate, what you should do is you should char a cinnamon stick and throw it in there and let it sit for a few minutes. Take it out, and so what you end up getting is sort of like a smoky cinnamon flavor, almost like like the difference between tequila and mezcal.
Yes,
in mezcal you got that
smokiness. Yes,
exactly. But it's hot chocolate and cinnamon, and it tastes like probably tastes like a fireplace or something. You know, you're sitting by the fireplace with a cup of hot chocolate.
I might roast some marshmallows along with it.
There you go. Yeah, it's that burnt smell. It's that sort of like burnished, dark smell that I think people associate with like being out by the campfire and you're drinking hot chocolate and you're maybe eating a little popcorn or whatever, right? And I love doing stuff like that because adding that char to the cinnamon stick is going to also tell a little bit of a story to your brain when you're consuming it. Right. And you may not even think about that story, but something about it feels right. That's how you do it.
And even with that part, like the storytelling portion of like everything from writing books to your productions on YouTube, I guess like were you always into storytelling?
Yeah, no, I've always been storytelling's been a huge thing for me because I've always been a big movie guy. Being a moviegoer as I am, storytelling is something that I think is the most exciting part about food. And I would argue that I got into it because of that. Because I feel like storytelling in food has become so devoid of what's the best part of the story and more about just like trying to be theatrical for the sake of being theatrical.
And go viral
or just like doing the same thing over and over. I'm not going to name any shows, but I would say like 95% of food shows are fucking trash and it's time for them to go. And I'm not afraid to say that or put that out there.
Bro.
It's not even talking shit. They're fucking going. And we're in the boats waiting.
Right.
And them motherfuckers are going to be really confused when the script gets flipped because it's time and people want something fun, but people also want something that means something.
And even what you mentioned in the fun portion of it, because I know one of your taglines is sort of like making cooking like exciting, I believe.
Yep.
So why is that like so important to you and what you do?
Because food is inherently exciting, and if it's not, whoever is handling it is doing a bad job, and that's the way I feel about it. I want people. This is the most exciting time in food in history. If that doesn't excite, if something in food, if food is not exciting you to some degree, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a lot. Whatever it is, then that means that there's much more to emphasize on.
What would you say is a key ingredient to great bread? I've been trying to master how to make bread.
Ooh, I mean flour.
Right. Aside from flour.
Well, funny enough, it's obviously having good ingredients is important, but you don't need a ton of ingredients to make great bread. You need good technique. So if you're making like sourdough bread, literally all you need is flour, water, and salt.
Right.
If it's sourdough, right? Because you're using like the sourdough starter, which doesn't require use. You just need flour and water to make a sourdough starter. So technically, you only need 3 ingredients to make some of the greatest bread in the world. But the technique is what makes the bread. I would say bread is 85% technique, or maybe even 90%. 10% ingredients. Ingredients almost impart. Like once you reach a threshold with ingredients where it doesn't make it that much better, and you start to realize, you know what, I need to spend more time making this bread as good as possible. Understanding, don't stretch it too much. Yeah. Don't knead it too much. But make sure I shape it this way so it's nice and tall and the bubbles are like this instead of like this. You know, it took me a year and a half to get good at bread.
Okay, so I'm about 7 months into it right now. And I'm at that portion because I kept trying to change the ingredients and like I'm using like tapioca flour mixed with the all-purpose flour and I'm trying to do all these things and I'm like, the texture still ain't there. I'm changing up all
stressing yourself out, man.
Yeah, completely.
It's a process that you can only get good at through reps.
Right.
So I would say what's going to make you really good at it is I would say stop adding ingredients and only focus on the 3, which is the flour, the water, and the salt. Only focus on those 3 and perfecting your technique, and look at every step. So
Okay.
you look at like the pre-ferment, and then the bulk ferment, and then you look at like, okay, temperatures for those, and then like how long do I want to knead it? How much do I want to stretch it? Do I do more or less folds? And just start playing with those parameters, because there's 100 of them just in
Right.
that process alone. Play with those parameters, see how they affect the bread, and then adjust a little bit, adjust a little bit, adjust a little bit. And in like 4 to 6 to 8 months, depending on how fast that process is for you,
Right.
you know, depends on how much you make bread, obviously.
Right.
So after 4, 6, 8 months, you will have a loaf of bread that is significantly better than the one 6, 8 months ago.
Right. How often would you suggest I make bread?
However much time you have and want to commit to it. I mean,
Okay.
when I was doing it, I was baking probably 3 loaves a week,
Okay.
which is a lot if you think about it, because it's a 27-hour process. So
Yeah.
like put that in math. And I didn't go to college, so I'm not very good at math. But
Right. Should take a long time.
yeah, it takes a long damn time, all right? That's like 5 days or something like that. But yeah, so about 3 loaves a week. And
Okay.
I will say that bread has gotten me more jobs than I can count.
Okay. How so?
I just bring a loaf of bread. If a lot of the restaurants I wanted to work with never had openings, so I would bring like loaves of bread with me on my stages, which is like an unpaid internship. And I
Right.
would just keep showing up every day until they eventually hired me, and I just keep giving them bread. And
Fire.
they're like, God damn, he keeps bringing the bread. It's so nice of him. And they're like, just give him a job. It's fine.
Right.
That's
Right.
basically how it went.
That's fire.
Yeah, it works. It works.
Last question. I guess like what's next for you that you can speak on?
There's a lot of things. Working on my second book now, so that's fun.
What's the theme of this book?
I can't say.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be a dead giveaway. It's very specific, but it's. I will say that it's something that I believe that it's something that everyone's asking for.
Okay.
The first book was more of like, let me go broad. This one's very focused, and it's very specific to what people really want from me.
Okay.
Secrets, in a way.
Okay.
And so that's that book. We're working on our first legit show, which I can't say anything about, but I can say that much.
Right.
And then I am working on a place to eat at without saying the word.
Okay.
I think that's contractually allowed. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Working on a place to eat at that's physical.
Right.
Is this all coming together a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit?
yeah. It's making sense to me.
Yeah, we're working on that. A bunch of new stuff for me, but I said I would come back to the restaurant industry, so I'm on my way.
Right. Coming back with some force.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
100%.
I'm excited. Like I said, as a fan, I've been watching you for the last couple of years, so I'm excited to see everything you do.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
I know you're
Appreciate
going to kill that shit.
This guy's an OG. He's been following for too long.
Right.
He's getting fucking sick of me at this point. Hopefully not.
Not even close.
Oh, good. Okay, we'll keep the parameter at a good spot. Yeah,
Right.
Amazing. Cool. Well, I appreciate it, man. Thank you so
you.
much. Yeah, and thank you for having me on here too. By the way, I appreciate
you,
that.
brother.
Yeah. Thank you. Seriously, amazing. Good questions too. Solid.
I mean, I'm a fan. It was easy.
This guy had all the info. Amazing. Good.